Gary Maloney woke at 3:17 a.m. to find his wife's side of the bed empty again. The sheets were cold, untouched for hours. He didn't move, didn't call out. Instead, he lay perfectly still in the darkness and listened to the sounds of his house. Downstairs, floorboards creaked. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Water ran in the kitchen sink. All normal sounds, except for the time they were happening and the frequency with which they'd been happening lately. 3 months ago, Nicole had been the woman who could sleep through a thunderstorm, who hit snooze twice every morning, who complained about 8 a.m. meetings like they were torture. Now she barely slept at all. Gary would wake in the night and find her pacing the living room, or sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing, or standing at the window like she was watching for something. When he asked, she always said the same thing. "I'm just tired." But tired people slept. Nicole looked like she was running from sleep, terrified of what might find her in the quiet hours. Gary slipped out of bed and moved to the top of the stairs. From this vantage point, he could see into the kitchen. Nicole stood at the counter, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with tension. She was thin now, too thin. The weight had fallen off her over the past few months, 20 pounds at least. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. The dark circles under her eyes had become permanent fixtures on her once bright face. Something was destroying his wife from the inside out, and she wouldn't tell him what. Gary was 45 years old, a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company. His job required attention to detail, pattern recognition, the ability to see when something in a complex system wasn't working correctly. He applied those same skills to his personal life, and right now, every alarm bell in his head was ringing. Nicole wasn't having an affair. Gary had considered it, dismissed it. An affair would make someone secretive, maybe guilty, but not terrified. Nicole was terrified. He could see it in the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, the way she checked the locks on the doors multiple times each night, the way her hands shook when her phone buzzed with notifications. She was afraid of something, or someone. Gary returned to bed before Nicole could catch him watching. When she finally came back upstairs 20 minutes later, he pretended to be asleep. She slid into bed beside him, and he felt the tension radiating from her body like heat. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, rigid and awake, until dawn. The next morning, Gary made coffee and watched Nicole push scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. She'd been a food lover once, passionate about cooking, always trying new recipes. Now meals seemed like obligations she could barely fulfill. "Nicole," he said carefully, "I think you should see a doctor. The insomnia, the weight loss." "I'm fine." Her voice was flat, automatic. "Just stressed with work." Nicole was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. Her schedule was flexible, her clients reasonable. There was no obvious source of work stress that would explain this level of deterioration. "What's really going on?" Gary asked, setting down his coffee cup. "And don't tell me nothing. I've been married to you for 8 years. I know when something's wrong." For a moment, Nicole's eyes met his, and Gary saw something that made his chest tighten. It was raw fear, the kind that came from genuine threat, not abstract anxiety. Then she looked away, picked up her plate, and carried it to the sink. "I have a deadline today," she said, her back to him. "I should get to work." She disappeared into her home office and closed the door. Gary sat at the kitchen table, thinking. He tried talking to her friends, casually asking if Nicole had mentioned anything troubling. They'd all said the same thing. Nicole had become distant lately, canceling plans, not responding to messages. Her sister Desiree had noticed the weight loss when they'd met for lunch 2 weeks ago, had expressed concern, but Nicole had brushed it off. Whatever was happening, Nicole was facing it alone, and she was losing. Gary made a decision. If his wife wouldn't tell him what was wrong, he'd find out himself. That afternoon, he visited an electronics store in a strip mall 40 minutes from their home. The young clerk, barely out of his teens, showed him a selection of small wireless cameras designed for home security. Gary bought 3 of them, one for the living room, one for the front porch, one for the kitchen. All connected to an app on his phone, all capable of recording motion-activated footage. Installing them was simple. Gary positioned the living room camera on a bookshelf, disguised among picture frames and decorative objects. The kitchen camera went on top of the refrigerator, angled to capture the whole room and the back door. The porch camera replaced their existing doorbell, which was old anyway. Nicole wouldn't notice, and even if she did, it would seem like a reasonable security upgrade. He activated all 3 cameras that evening while Nicole was in the shower. By the time she came downstairs, her hair damp and her face drawn, the system was running. The first 2 days yielded nothing useful. Nicole worked in her office during the day, made half-hearted attempts at dinner in the evening, barely slept at night. She checked the front door locks obsessively, sometimes 5 or 6 times before bed. But no one came to the house. No mysterious phone calls. No visible trigger for her fear. On the 3rd day, Gary tested his theory. "I have to go into the office today," he announced at breakfast, though he had no such obligation. "Probably be there until 4 or 5. Nicole's fork clattered against her plate. "You're leaving? Just for the day? What?" No reason. But her hands were shaking again, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'll see you tonight." Gary kissed her forehead, grabbed his keys, and drove away. He went to a coffee shop 3 miles from their house, ordered a large black coffee, and opened the camera app on his phone. At first, nothing happened. Nicole moved around the house, worked in her office, made herself tea she didn't drink. The morning stretched into afternoon. Gary was starting to think his instincts had been wrong when, at 2:47 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. Gary's phone captured it all. The knock, loud and insistent. Nicole's head jerking up, her face going white. She stood from her desk slowly, like someone walking to their execution. The camera angle from the porch showed her approach the door, hesitate, then open it. A man stood on their porch. Late 30s, medium build, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Gary didn't recognize him. The man's face was partially obscured by the camera angle, but his posture radiated casual menace, the easy confidence of someone who knew he had power. Nicole went completely still when she saw him. The man's mouth moved, but Gary couldn't hear what he said through the silent video feed. Whatever it was made Nicole's shoulders sag with defeat. The man held out his hand, palm up. An unmistakable gesture. "Give me what I came for." Nicole's hand disappeared into her pocket. She pulled out an envelope. Gary could see it was thick, stuffed with something, and placed it in the man's hand. Her own hand was trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. The man opened the envelope, rifled through what looked like cash, and nodded with satisfaction. He said something else, and Nicole flinched like he'd hit her. Then he turned and walked away, down the porch steps, and to a black sedan parked on the street. The whole interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes. Gary sat in the coffee shop, his heart pounding, and watched the video 3 more times. The envelope had been substantial. Several $1,000s, at least. Nicole was paying this man, and she was terrified of him. Blackmail. It had to be blackmail. Gary's hands tightened around his phone. Someone was threatening his wife, extorting money from her, and she'd been too frightened to tell him. How long had this been going on? How much had she already paid? And what did this man have on her that made her willing to destroy herself rather than ask for help? He checked their joint bank account. No unusual withdrawals, which meant Nicole was using money from her business account, the one she used for client payments and expenses. Gary didn't have access to that account. They'd kept their finances partially separate, an arrangement that had always worked fine, but he could guess what he'd find if he looked. Regular large withdrawals, bleeding her dry. Gary finished his coffee, paid his bill, and drove home. He arrived at 4:30 p.m., his usual time. When he walked through the door, Nicole was in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. She looked up when he entered, and Gary saw her try to smooth her features into something approximating normal. "How was work?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Fine." Gary set down his briefcase and crossed the kitchen to stand in front of his wife. He took her hands in his, felt how cold they were, how she was trembling. "Nicole, who was that man?" The color drained from her face. "What man?" "The one who came to the house today. The one you gave money to." Nicole's legs seemed to give out. Gary caught her, guided her to a chair at the kitchen table. She buried her face in her hands, and her whole body shook with silent sobs. Gary knelt beside her, one hand on her back, and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "His name is Everett Welsh. He's been blackmailing me for 3 months." Gary felt a cold fury settle over him, the kind that made his mind sharper instead of clouded. "Tell me everything." Nicole raised her head, her eyes red and swollen. "4 months ago, I was working on a project for a new client. A website redesign for a small tech startup. The client seemed normal at first, professional. But then he started making comments during our video calls. Sexual comments. I shut it down, told him it was inappropriate. He apologized, said it wouldn't happen again. She paused, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. But it did happen again. He started sending messages, explicit ones. Pictures of himself. I blocked him, canceled the contract, refunded his deposit. I thought that was the end of it. Gary could already see where this was going. His jaw clenched. 2 weeks later, Everett Welsh showed up at our door. He had screenshots of our conversations, doctored ones. Made it look like I'd been the one initiating sexual conversations, sending inappropriate messages. He said if I didn't pay him, he'd send them to you, to my clients, post them online. He'd destroy my career and my marriage. Nicole, I know how it sounds, she said quickly. I know I should have come to you immediately. But Gary, the screenshots looked real. He'd edited them so well, and I was terrified you wouldn't believe me. Or that even if you did, my professional reputation would be destroyed. So I paid him $5,000 the first time. And he kept coming back, Gary said flatly. Nicole nodded miserably. Every 2 weeks. Sometimes more, sometimes less. He's taken almost $30,000 from me. I've drained my business account, started borrowing against my credit cards. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep paying him, but I can't let him release those screenshots either. Gary stood, walked to the window, and stared out at their quiet suburban street. Everett Welsh, a blackmailer, a predator who'd found a vulnerable target and bled her systematically, who'd taken advantage of Nicole's fear and isolation, who'd counted on her shame, keeping her silent. He'd made a mistake. Gary, Nicole's voice was small behind him. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I was just so scared. Gary turned to face his wife and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just solved a complex logistics problem and knew exactly how to execute the solution. Don't apologize, he said. You did what you thought you had to do. But now it's my turn. Nicole looked at him with confusion and the first glimmer of hope he'd seen in her eyes in months. What do you mean? I mean Everett Welsh picked the wrong family to terrorize. Gary pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, and showed Nicole the footage from today. I've got him on video, committing extortion. That's a felony. But more importantly, I know exactly what kind of person he is now, and I know how to deal with people like him. We should go to the police, Nicole said, but she sounded uncertain. Gary shook his head. We could, and maybe we will, eventually. But first, I'm going to make sure Everett Welsh understands what happens when you threaten my wife. I'm going to make him regret ever knocking on our door. He sat down next to Nicole and took her hand. Trust me, he made a mistake, and I'm going to make sure he pays for it. Gary spent the next 3 days researching Everett Welsh, and what he found painted a picture of a man who'd made a career out of preying on the vulnerable. Welsh had a record, though nothing that had stuck. 2 previous arrests for harassment, 1 for fraud, all dismissed or pled down to minor charges. He'd been sued in civil court 3 times, always settling out of court with NDAs attached. The pattern was clear. Welsh found targets, usually women, usually with something to lose, and squeezed them until they broke or paid. He lived in a rundown apartment complex on the east side of the city, drove a car that was expensive enough to show he was successful at his schemes, but not so expensive it would draw attention. He had no steady job, no legitimate income that Gary could find. Welsh was a professional parasite. Gary also discovered that Welsh had at least 2 other active victims. He'd followed Welsh for 2 days, watched him make house calls similar to the one he'd made to Nicole. Both times, a terrified-looking woman had handed him money. Both times, Welsh had left with a satisfied smirk. The man was systematic, organized, and apparently convinced he was untouchable. Gary was about to teach him otherwise. On Thursday evening, Gary told Nicole he had a plan but didn't give her details. The less you know right now, the better, he said. If this goes sideways, I don't want you implicated. Just trust me. Nicole looked at him with an expression that mixed relief, love, and worry. Be careful. He's dangerous. So am I, Gary said, when someone threatens my family. The next afternoon, Gary called Everett Welsh from a burner phone he'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Yeah. Welsh's voice was rough, impatient. Mr. Welsh, my name is Benjamin Hatfield. I got your number from a mutual acquaintance. I have a business proposition that might interest you. There was a pause. What kind of business? The lucrative kind. I have access to certain information about several prominent local business owners. Information they'd pay well to keep private. I need someone with your particular skill set to help me monetize it. 50-50 split. Gary could practically hear Welsh's greed through the phone. Where'd you get this information? I'm an accountant at a firm that handles several high-profile clients. You'd be amazed what gets left on shared servers. Gary kept his voice smooth, confident. But I can't approach these people directly. That's where you come in. You have experience with this kind of work. I've seen your results. Another pause, longer this time. Gary held his breath. If Welsh was smart, he'd be suspicious. But greed usually won over caution with men like Welsh. All right, Welsh said finally. I'm listening. Where do you want to meet? There's an old warehouse district on 4th Street, near the river. Building 7. Tonight at 8. Come alone, and bring proof you're serious about this. References from your previous clients. How do I know this isn't a setup? Gary laughed, making it sound relaxed and confident. Because if I wanted to set you up, I'd just go to the cops with what I know about your operations. I'm not looking to cause trouble, Mr. Welsh. I'm looking to make money. Lots of it. Welsh grunted. 8 o'clock. Building 7. I'll be there. The line went dead. Gary sat in his car, his heart racing but his mind clear. The warehouse district was perfect. Abandoned buildings, no security cameras, no witnesses. He'd scouted it yesterday, knew every entrance and exit. Tonight, Everett Welsh would learn what happened when predators became prey. Gary arrived at the warehouse at 7:30, giving himself time to prepare. The building was a relic from the city's industrial past, all crumbling brick and broken windows. Inside, the main floor was open and empty, moonlight streaming through gaps in the roof. Gary set up 2 portable LED work lights, positioning them to create harsh shadows, then placed a folding chair in the center of the space. At 7:55, headlights swept across the building's exterior. Gary heard a car door slam, footsteps approaching. He stood in the shadows near the entrance, watching as Everett Welsh walked into the building. Welsh looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Hatfield, you here? Gary stepped out of the shadows, and Welsh spun to face him. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then Welsh's eyes narrowed. I know you. You're Nicole Maloney's husband, Gary finished. Hello, Everett. Welsh's hand moved toward his jacket, but Gary was faster. He pulled out a pistol, licensed, legal, and loaded, and aimed it steadily at Welsh's center mass. I wouldn't, Gary said calmly. Keep your hands where I can see them. Welsh slowly raised his hands, his face shifting from surprise to calculation. This is stupid, Maloney. You think threatening me is going to. I'm not threatening you, Gary interrupted. I'm giving you information. Sit down. He gestured to the chair. Welsh hesitated, then sat, his eyes never leaving the gun. Gary pulled out his phone with his free hand and projected footage on the opposite wall using a small portable projector he'd brought. The video showed Welsh's visits to 3 different houses, including Gary's own, clear footage of money changing hands. That's you, committing felony extortion, Gary said. I've got dates, times, and I've identified 2 of your other victims. I've also got documentation of my wife's financial records showing the payments she's made to you, along with the original communications between her and her client, proving the screenshots you used were fabricated. Welsh's jaw tightened. So what? You gonna go to the cops? Good luck making that stick. I've got lawyers. I'm sure you do, Gary agreed. But here's the thing, Everett. I'm not going to the cops. Not yet. First, I'm going to make you a deal. What kind of deal? Gary pulled out a folder and tossed it onto Welsh's lap. That's a full accounting of everything you've taken from my wife. $32,000. You're going to pay it back. All of it. You have 2 weeks. Welsh laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And if I don't, then this footage, along with complete documentation of your activities and the identities of your other victims, gets sent to the police, the FBI, every major news outlet in the city, and posted on every social media platform I can find. Your face, your name, your address, everything. The laughter died. You're bluffing. Am I? Gary's voice was ice. You're a predator, Everett. You find vulnerable people and you exploit them because you think they're too scared to fight back. You're probably right about most of them. But I'm not vulnerable, and I'm not scared. I'm angry. And angry men with resources are dangerous. He pulled out a second folder. This contains information about your other victims. Names I've confirmed, addresses, documentation of your extortion. If you don't return every penny you took from my wife, I will personally contact each of these women and offer to help them prosecute you. I'll pay for their lawyers. I'll testify on their behalf. I'll make it my mission to ensure you spend the next decade in prison. Welsh's face had gone pale. You can't. I absolutely can. But there's another option. Gary lowered the gun slightly, but kept it trained on Welsh. You return the money. All of it. To my wife's account within 2 weeks. Then you leave town. Not just the city, the state. You find somewhere else to run your schemes. And you never, ever contact Nicole again. You don't drive down our street. You don't look us up online. You erase us from your memory. And if I do all that, then I keep this evidence locked away. It doesn't go to the cops unless you give me a reason. You get to walk away, start over somewhere else. Probably find new victims who don't have husbands willing to hunt you down. That's not my problem, as long as those victims aren't my wife. Welsh's eyes darted around the warehouse, looking for an escape route, but Gary had positioned himself between Welsh and the only exit. Finally, Welsh's shoulders slumped. How do I know you won't go to the cops anyway? You don't, Gary said simply. You'll have to trust me the same way my wife had to trust you wouldn't release those fake screenshots after she paid you. Except I'm actually a man of my word. Pay back the money, leave town, and we're done. Fail to do that, and I will destroy your life. Those are your options. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the broken windows. Then Welsh stood slowly, his hands still raised. 2 weeks, he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I'll get you the money. Excellent choice. Gary gestured toward the door with the gun. Now get out. And Everett, if I see you anywhere near my wife or my house again, I won't be calling the police. I'll handle it myself. Understood. Welsh nodded stiffly and walked toward the door. As he reached the threshold, Gary called out. One more thing. The other women you're blackmailing. I want you to stop. Delete whatever you have on them. Leave them alone. Because if I find out you're still operating in this city after tonight, our deal is off. Welsh didn't answer, just disappeared into the darkness. Gary stood alone in the warehouse for several minutes, his heart pounding now that the confrontation was over. He'd just threatened a career criminal, extracted a promise of repayment through intimidation and force. It wasn't legal, wasn't entirely ethical, but Gary found he didn't care. Welsh had terrorized his wife for months, had taken their money, had made Nicole afraid to sleep in her own home. Sometimes, justice happened outside courtrooms. 10 days later, $32,000 appeared in Nicole's business account. The deposit came from a money order, untraceable, with no note attached. Gary checked the records and confirmed the amount matched exactly what Welsh had taken. He also confirmed that Everett Welsh had left the state. A quick search of public records showed Welsh had terminated his apartment lease early and listed a forwarding address in Nevada. Gary had a friend in law enforcement run a quiet check. Welsh hadn't popped up anywhere in the local area since their meeting in the warehouse. The man had actually kept his word. Gary told Nicole everything that night, sitting together on their couch while rain pattered against the windows. He expected her to be angry that he'd confronted Welsh alone, that he'd risked his safety, that he'd operated outside the law. Instead, she cried with relief and held him so tightly he could barely breathe. You got it all back, she whispered. Everything he took. And he's gone, Gary confirmed. He won't bother you again. Nicole pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. What you did, it was dangerous. You could have been hurt. He could have. He couldn't, Gary interrupted gently. Because I planned it carefully, and I never gave him an opening. I'm not a hero, Nicole. I'm just a man who protects what's his. And you're mine to protect. She kissed him then, deep and desperate. And for the first time in months, Gary felt the tension leave her body. That night, she slept the whole night through, curled against him, her breathing deep and even. In the morning, Gary woke to find Nicole in the kitchen, actually cooking breakfast. Not pushing food around a plate, but genuinely cooking, pancakes, bacon, eggs, fresh coffee. She looked up when he entered, and he saw something in her face he'd been afraid he'd lost forever. She looked happy. I'm going to gain back all the weight I lost, she announced, flipping a pancake. I'm going to sleep regular hours. I'm going to call my sister and apologize for being distant. I'm going to live again. Gary poured himself coffee and watched his wife move around the kitchen with energy and purpose. 3 months ago, she'd been dying by inches, ground down by fear and isolation. Now she was healing, coming back to herself. And Everett Welsh, wherever he was, had learned an important lesson. Some people had protectors. Some people had husbands who wouldn't sit by and let them suffer. Gary's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Victor Schwartz, his lawyer friend who'd helped with the Ronald Miller case months ago. They'd stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for lunch. Heard something interesting. SEC's investigating a guy in Nevada for financial fraud. Name's Everett Welsh. Thought you might want to know. Gary smiled and typed back, "Thanks for the heads up." He deleted the message and poured more coffee. So Welsh hadn't learned his lesson after all, had just moved his operations to a new location. That wasn't Gary's problem anymore, as long as Nicole was safe. Though if Welsh ever came back to their city, if he ever approached Nicole again, Gary had copies of all the evidence locked in a safe deposit box. And he had no qualms about using it. "Breakfast is ready," Nicole called, setting plates on the table. Gary joined her, and they ate together in comfortable silence, sunlight streaming through the windows. The cameras were still installed around the house. Gary had decided to keep them, just as a precaution, but they only recorded peaceful, normal moments now. No mysterious visitors. No trembling exchanges of money. No fear. Just a couple rebuilding their life, one meal at a time. Nicole reached across the table and took Gary's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me, for finding out the truth, for making him stop." Gary squeezed her hand. "I'll always protect you. That's not negotiable." She smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time in months. "I know. That's why I married you." Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Cars pulled out of driveways, heading to work. Kids waited at bus stops. Dogs barked in yards. Everything normal, everything safe. And in a warehouse on the east side of the city, the portable projector and work lights were gone, the folding chair removed. Every trace of Gary's confrontation with Everett Welsh erased. It had happened, and now it was over, filed away as a dark chapter that was finished. Gary Maloney had faced down a predator and won. His wife was safe, his marriage was intact, and the man who'd terrorized them was gone. Sometimes, justice looked like a quiet breakfast on a Saturday morning. Sometimes, it looked like knowing you'd done whatever was necessary to protect the person you loved. And sometimes, it looked like a man smiling as he ate pancakes, secure in the knowledge that his enemies had learned an important lesson. Predators could become prey. Hunters could be hunted. And Gary Maloney never forgot a threat.